Welcome to the Chess Channel, the channel where you can learn loads. If you followed our last video on the story of Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen, you would know what awaits you. We are going to look at the latest in this season's Top Chess Engine Championship. Before we go into the Superfinal match between the two best engines of this season's championship, there is something I would like to say when it comes to the runner-up. Both Leela and Komodo Dragon had finished the Premier League with exactly the same points, and closer than this you do not get. On this occasion, Leela made it through, and there is a huge journey ahead, not just for Leela but for any engine that is up against the likes of Stockfish, a Stockfish that basically dominated this type of contest from the very start. So what we are looking at right now is a 100-game match between Leela and undisputed champion Stockfish. And one positive thing that comes out of this is that we are going to see all 100 games. The engine that gets past the 50% threshold also wins this year's Superfinal. This season's Superfinal is expected to bring something new to the game. Though many would expect Stockfish to win it, never underestimate the runner-up. With the Top Chess Engine Championship being the most sophisticated contest on the planet, this has to be something no one really should be missing. I shall try and bring out some selected games only because it is impossible to bring them all out. Do expect a large number of these 100 games to end up in draws, but is this to say a drawn game is automatically ruled out? Take it from me, we can learn more and better when some games are drawn, but because many find them boring, we shall try and minimize them. Something else for those who want to experience these types of games is about the duration of each and every game. Do expect some really marathon runs, and it would not be unusual to see games in excess of 200 moves. We would try to avoid these, but should a given game stand out, we would not run in the opposite direction. The Superfinal games are already underway, and this is the first game we would wish to cover. With engines having access to some super hardware, do also expect to see some incredible chess. The question to ask is whether they're the ability to learn. The specs used in this Superfinal are second to none. Too many cores to mention and too much memory neither your computer nor mine can cope with. Without mentioning what took place in the first few games already played, this is what we have right now. I hope all the details are very clear, but for those who want to know over and above what shows on your screen, is as follows. Time controls are 120 plus 12. Stockfish, that is the winner of the Premier League, starts with the black pieces in every pair of games. Lastly and not least, are the opening books used. We would explain what opening book is used with each game to be covered. So with all this in mind, this is what we have. It is round the game of round 8 in the Superfinal, and we have Stockfish assuming the white pieces. What we have missing though, is the book used. So, to clear the mist from the outset, this game of round 8 is using a 9-move book. We can go straight to that point, or we can just quote the moves so everyone knows where the moves come from. So here we go. 1e4 is met by the Sicilian. This is the very second game trying this opening. Knight f3, led to d6, and with Stockfish going for the usual, Leela takes, this pawn is captured with the knight, and with knight f6 and knight c3, Leela tries this move to a6. For those who do not need any reminding, this is the one and only Najdorf. Via this bishop response, Leela advances this pawn to the 6th, and with f3 and bishop e7, after queen d2, b5, g4 and knight d7, this is how the book ends. What we are looking here is the Byrne, an opening that is extremely popular for both sides. The first out-of-book move for Stockfish was to castle, and with Leela prepping this type of move, this is one type of game that is going to be on edge. With the likelihood, Leela will castle short, this is exactly what anyone needs. Each engine will gather their pieces to aim against the opposing king, and it is who gets there first. It is actually a mixture of attacking and defending. In either case, we will have a battle taking place on both sides of the board, unless one engine backs off and goes into defensive mode. Right after this push to the 4th, Leela repositions her knight to this outpost. Even if the knight moves away from d4, the discovery on the knight on b6 is met by the cover the queen offers. The knight on b6 has a specific objective. Once he jumps into the 3rd, he can be swapped for one of these two bishops. Maybe for this reason alone, Stockfish backed off his queen to the 1st to avoid this, and with knight number 2 now coming into the picture, Stockfish opts for a king move. It is one of them moves, is it not? Leela here activated her queenside rook, Stockfish in turn occupies this square with the pawn, and with Leela finally getting her king to safety, this was one move that may not belong. Normally what you would have on the king side is a few pieces to be able to defend the king. Look at how nicely and coordinated Stockfish's pieces are where his king is. Leela, other than the 3 pawns on her king side, has nothing. Is this going to pose a possible problem? Stockfish was beginning to calculate deep to see if the engine could put in place a deep plan. Nearly 2.5 minutes down the line, Stockfish came up with this very mysterious bishop response to the first, which clearly explains the engine's move to place his king on b1. This bishop move to c1 looks to be defensive, but this bishop still controls some key squares from d2 all the way to h6. If you plot this setup on your own hardware, you would need a supercomputer to be able to work out this very specific move. This is where all those cores and RAM come in. In their absence, this bishop move to c1 appears to look like a type of blunder. Let us see what this move does later on. Leela was the first engine to start the assault. She launched after this knight in this way, the knight was then backed off to the second, and from this point on the game is just about to get wild. For those who are interested in the evaluations of each engine, well, let me tell you this. If you set up this position using your own hardware and software, what you are bound to get is a tiny advantage in favor of Stockfish. Stockfish 15, for example, at depth 27 looks at this position as 0.78. The servers where this game is played do show us a completely different picture. For one engine, the evaluation is 2.34, and for the other 0.59. Can these evaluations be accurate for one engine, or are both incorrect? This attack on the knight, forcing him to retreat to the second, automatically exposes this pawn on b4, but should he need to be covered? Leela could not let him fall, and in this light advances yet another pawn to be able to block the taking. Queen g3 was initiated by Stockfish with ideas of trying to get this pawn on d6 to come under pressure. If the knight from d4 slots into b5, you would have a 3-pronged attack on the d-pawn, and this pawn would not be savable. Correct? No, that is incorrect. This pawn can always advance to the 5th and Leela would be able to save him. Given all this, Leela worked out another way to save the pawn. She got her queen to come into play, and out of nowhere, Stockfish calculated an interesting variation. The engine developed the bishop to the 3rd, and this move was just spot on. This pawn on e6 is not the new potential target. If you take him with the bishop, when the bishop is eliminated, you can then go on and take with the knight, and the fork on the queen and rook would speak for itself. This would not work if Leela moves the rook out of f8 in the meantime. Leela once again worked out her own plan. Though rook e8 makes perfect sense, this was how Leela played it. What this move does is to instantly expose the queens, and Leela's intention is to have Stockfish trade them. Do you swap the queen for the queen, or do you try something else? This is a difficult one to decide. For example, if you chase after the queen using the bishop, this push to e5 spells nothing but trouble. Right now there is a problem at hand. Knight f5 as a counterattack can lead to the removal of this bishop, but if you do go for this, Leela would be messing up. Once you get rid of the bishop with an incoming check, king h8 and knight takes can be played, but are you looking for too much? Maybe, maybe not. Is there a problem on the second and particularly on c2? The rook pair on the first actually do save the day. Even if you take with a check, king a1 will lead to a razor-sharp continuation. What Leela is looking to achieve is a potential mate on the second. If you jump the knight into c4, the mate in 1 is very close and yet miles apart. Would rook b1 stop the mate, and if so, would it be at all playable? It is very likely to backfire, but maybe it would be your job to discover why and how. This would be the move you are looking for. It's a very hard one to find, but this initiative would speak volumes. Should you get rid of the knight? When this check is initiated, Rook b2 is forced, but the continuation is what is going to bother you. Once this pawn comes off, the rook cannot be saved and this game is most likely to be won by Leela. If you summoned the queen in to stop the mate, this pin on the rook can hold for as long as it can last. Rook d8 to come out of trouble, can get you in with subsequent takes in the center, and if the knight does come off, and he has to, if you capture with the knight, before you make a runner with the queen, now it would be the right time to take with a check. Take now with the queen, and Leela can either get the queens to come off or she can go on and remove this pawn from the third. This three-pronged attack looks serious, but there is a very easy out. This bishop move is all you would need for the time being and everything is sorted quite nicely. It is right now, but it would be Leela the engine with all the threats. Queen g3, and if you want to lose fast, this is what you can go for. Allowing the queen to slip in with this check, forces the queen to block it, and whether you trade the queens or not, this would be a slam dunk. There are so many other lines of play we can try, and we just might try another. After this hypothetical knight move into c4, we can clearly see rook b1 does not work. What does work is to challenge the queen outright, and only when the queen is swapped, the best way to capture will be to use the bishop. Rook d8 to save the rook, can easily lead to this takes, and if you take and take with the knight, this would still work in favor of Stockfish. Okay, we have come a long way to demonstrate some what-ifs, but let us come back to see how the engines moved on. As soon as this pawn found d5, Stockfish does opt for this advancement to the fifth too. Has Stockfish just offered this pawn, and if so, should Leela grab him? If she decides to do this, how is best to do it? Taking with the queen will spell disaster because the queen would come under fire by the bishop. And because there is no way this queen can escape, once she falls, this would be the end of the game. So now that we have seen this takes with the queen does not work, Leela still went on to remove this pawn, but in this instance, she uses the knight to do the job. Stockfish 16 is an incredibly strong engine, and it is not for nothing that it had dominated nearly every single event from day one. In this instance, this is how the engine played on, and is now determined to show who the real boss is. Rook e8 getting ready for something big, led to the knight to join in the party, and this is one move that would not make sense to many humans. What is the knight's function on f4, and why give the opportunity to unpin the knight from e5? Leela was just about to take advantage of this move. She backed off the knight, and her follow-up response would be to come in with e5. The only way to stop e5 and not lose a knight is to move the knight from d4 out of the way, and should e5 appear, the knight can move into e2 to cover for the otherwise exposed queen on g3. And yet, when this position arose, Stockfish was not amused. The engine does discover an unbelievably powerful someone, but before we can show, are you willing to give it a chance? Has anyone been able to find this knight move into b5, and if so, have you tried this line of play a bit further? It is the wrong answer because there are repercussions. Once you hit this guy off with a check, king a1 can easily be met by this queen repositioning. Though knight d4 looks like the natural move to go for, there is way more than meets the eye. Can you spot a move many would miss? What if you sacrifice the exchange with this check? Rook takes, and now this very daring push to the third, and this is how you exert your dominance. Knight takes, which is forced to prevent the mate, would easily get you with this pin, and should you reposition your queen to the edge of the board, not only this knight comes flying off, but the game takes a completely different turn. Rook d1 is not going to be enough. Leela by this point would have too much, and with this type of imbalance, it would soon be game over. Returning to the game, with Stockfish being fully capable of working out this line of play, the beast tried an entirely different line. We can only hope you were able to spot it, because what Stockfish conjured up is the difference between day and night. This was the move Stockfish executed. If you take, and take with a check, where would you place the king? King h8 looks like a good idea, but it would be in fact fatal. Can you work this one out? It's this knight check on the 6th. With the knight now being forced off, as soon as this pawn is removed, this is also a checkmate, and what a way to go down. No rook on d1 would be necessary and no bishop on c1 is needed. This beautiful checkmate has just been masterminded using the pawn on g6, the bishop on e6 and the rook on h1. Now that we know king h8 does not work, king f8 would be a much better alternative. Having said this, this would still not be good enough. With a minor piece down and a pawn up, if you try this avenue of play, queen e5 will get you absolutely nowhere. Remove this pawn from the game, and the end is very near. The only way to stop disaster is to get in this rook move, but as soon as the queen comes under fire, taking on g5 is going to be catastrophic. Once this nifty fork appears, taking the knight will also drop the queen, and this would be a done deal. Are we ready to return to the game to witness what took place? When this knight was thrown into the mix, Leela grabs hold of this pawn with a check, and with the king now forced to the edge of the board, Leela is on her way to create the big bang. She set things in motion by advancing this pawn to the 4th, but this very initiative actually is flagged as a mini blunder. What this move did was to allow Stockfish to return the knight to safety, and with this renewed attack on the queen, this queen had to find a safe haven somewhere. With Leela backing her off to this outpost, Stockfish once again comes up with an incredibly strong counter move. It was this very interesting bishop move right into the 5th. Stockfish is down by a full pawn, but what side would you like to have? A quick analysis leads to this. The knight on b6 not only looks hopeless, but he is hopeless. He has no clear targets. Other than c4, which is a horrible place to put him, he has the very corner, but let's just call him hopeless. This bishop on e7 is not much better either. Having said this though, he is a much flexible bishop. He has f8, he has this move to d6, and he additionally has this outpost on c5. His twin brother on b7 is in a far worse position because of the pawn on d5 obstructing his vision and every move. The pawns on f7, g7 and h7 respectively are numb. If any one of them makes a move, a mate is very likely to be triggered. We can use only one variation to prove our case. What would happen if you back off this bishop to f8? Take with a check, and whether this bishop is removed or not much is going to change. If we take this bishop out of his misery, this incoming check can lead to either the removal of g6 or the king backing off. Taking on g6 will get you done in 4. There is only one way to do it here, but can you see it? It's by taking this pawn with a check using the pawn. King g8 forced, and now what you are looking for is the icing on the cake. Anything basically works here. In with a check, have this rook removed, but right after this brand new check materializes, the checkmate is achieved in only 2 moves, and we can skip this process easily. So coming back to the very game, there is only one single move that saves you from a mate, but is Leela able to find it? She found it all right, but this also meant she had to give material up. Having gone for this type of response, the rook came flying off, and with Leela capturing with the bishop, Stockfish goes on to apply this pin. Knight e6 to muddy the waters resulted to this line of play, and this would not have been possible if the knight did not move into e6. Bishop d8 led to yet another spectacular show by Stockfish. It is again not an easy move to work out. Even if we see it, we may not be able to understand it. This is why these types of games are so spectacular to watch. This was that move, which Stockfish had not problem finding in a jiffy. It's an extremely deep move with plenty of sidelines to it. With the queens coming off, these 2 knights in the center also went, and without any real delay, this is how Leela attempts to retaliate. With the rook dropping back, we saw this push to the 3rd, and with Stockfish pushing on, can Leela hold? Rook f8 to allow this knight on e6 some leeway, led to this adjustment. We are not going to explain this move because it is self-explanatory one move later. Via this bishop repositioning, Stockfish charges after the rook, and with Leela now getting him to reposition to this outpost, Stockfish in turn calls in his knight to mount this square on f5. As soon as this bishop attack materialized, it appeared Leela was about to pick up something. There is a bishop on b4 ready to drop, and there is this rook on d3 that is under fire. Nothing seems to work but one move only. Can you spot it, and if so, can you tell? It was this timely knight check on the 7th, and Leela looks so close and yet she is miles away. King h8 resulted to this vicious rook attack, but was it sound? Why on earth can't the rook get rid of this bishop? This move is disastrous. When the knight comes under attack, taking on g5 spells the end. Though this bishop on c7 can easily come off, Stockfish does have a way more powerful initiative. It's via this blast of a move. Rook e4, the only move to stop the mate, will lead to the rooks to come off, and when this bishop is put to rest, the rest of the game and how it goes would speak for itself. And for this very reason, as soon as the rook came up with this threat, what Stock is looking for next is to roll in this attack on the knight with the aim to win the bishop. With Leela not liking this position, and with Leela not looking to take this bishop on b4, the engine came up with this ingenious attack on the rook. What this meant for Stockfish was one thing. The rook backed off the first, this pawn came off, and with this push to the 6th on the cards, this is how Leela tries to remedy the situation. When this move appeared, things were going to happen quite rapidly. Both bishops came off, and now via this knight response, Stockfish finds the right time to join up the rooks. Knight back to e6, led to this attack on the rook, and with this rook adjustment, there are 3 ways to play it out. This knight must go somewhere unless you get the rook to come into c1. Stockfish went for this line of play, and Leela here runs out of options. She repeated her last knight move, but as soon as this rook found this outpost, it had to be game over very soon. Though Stockfish is closing in very fast, the engine is still now showing a checkmate. As soon as this pawn disappeared, Stockfish grabs the bishop with an incoming check, and with the king finding the 7th, Stockfish takes again with yet another check. By the way, as soon as the bishop disappeared, Stockfish finally locks in a checkmate in 30 moves. With the trading on g6, Stockfish returns the rook to the 1st, and with the knight backing off to the 7th, Stockfish chose best to get the rooks to come together. Leela has played a very interesting game, but everything she tried went up in thin smoke. As soon as this knight move was played, we also knew Leela commits to yet another huge blunder. That mate Stockfish worked out against her was now halved. Even here, Stockfish never gave Leela a breathing moment. Having gone for this ingenious move, the idea is that even if you take, this incoming check is still going to do the job. King h8 runs into this takes check, and with the knight being forced back to cover, everything Leela has right now is held hostage. Rook a8 and a3, and what you have a mate in a handful of moves. Coming back, Leela does not engage and does not take the rook. The engine went for this response, and with Stockfish grabbing hold of this rook, the engine has a secure mate in 11 moves. King g6, and now this rook repositioning to hold this king at bay, led to the knight to make his way into f5, but as soon as this rook from the back rank found the 5th, Leela goes on to play this move. Stockfish was about to take no hostages. The engine here gets rid of this pawn with another check, and it appears this king move to f7 has just accelerated the rate of that locked-in checkmate by a few moves. King e7 led to the elimination of the knight, and via this attack on the rook, which was helpless, via this adjustment by the rook, Stockfish is looking at a mate in just 4 moves. King e8 resulted to this rook move, and though we must point out Stockfish is still clearly showing a mate in 4 is still on, what you in fact see is a mate in just 1 move. King f8 led to this blow, and this is how Stockfish checkmates Leela in yet another game. It is not known why Stockfish showed a mate in 4 when in fact it was a mate in just 1 move, but Leela also seems to have the same problem when it comes to evaluating similar positions. Right after the rook found this outpost on c7, Leela was showing an eval of 36.29. A move later, she adjusted this figure to 127.4, and this is how it remained even when checkmated. And this was yet another Stockfish victory, with Leela being even unable to cope in any shape or form. If Stockfish 12 was a beast, Stockfish 13 was unstoppable, but with each successive version of this engine has now become a real monster. Stockfish 16, not just in this round but from the start, has played some really complex games, and even many of the moves the engine went for cannot be understood by most humans. It is my personal belief, and we make this from what we have seen so far, Stockfish will go on and make a very easy meal out of any of his opponents. Leela had a problem with coping and hardly made any realistic threats. And this was the game of round 8, with Stockfish being simply unstoppable. The previous game of round 7 using the same exact opening led to a very easy draw, and this is how we expect Stockfish to perform throughout. In the meantime, there is more to follow. Until then, all, God bless, and I do look forward to seeing you again with our return.